by the Honorable Prime Minister and the Honorable Finance Minister, with the 5 pillars of quantum jump in recovery, quantum jump in economy, infrastructure, technology-driven systems, vibrant demography, sustained demand, and the supply chain. And the focus has to be on self-reliance to empower local economies through local enterprises, particularly MSMEs. So the key long-term measures include policy reforms and credit availability for MSME sector, particularly strengthening agriculture infrastructure, logistics and capacity building, the labor code, and policy reforms to fast-track investments, mining, energy sector interventions, and lowering of entry barriers in the coal sector, promotion of private and foreign direct investment, and a slew of opening up measures. So we need to deliberate on how the economic stimulus package can be turned into a prime mover for inclusive green growth. So as you all can see, we have a very remarkable lineup of speakers and panelists for today's event. We've been joined by a number of people, maybe about 300 plus from across the globe. And we have, since the format is like, we'll have interventions by key speakers, followed by a panel discussion. The audience can send in their questions in the Q&A panel, which is on the top right side of the screen during the panel discussion. And the proceedings will be recorded, and the recommendations of this, as well as a pre-event survey, which was done very rigorously for last 1 week. So all these, the survey results will be analyzed and it will be presented in the form of a report. May I now request Mr. Atul Bagai, the country head for United Nations Environment Program, which is the nodal agency for PAGE in India, to address the participants, please. Mr. Atul Bagai.
Hello, and UNITAR. I would like to welcome all of you to this webinar. Anubha has given a very good introduction to the context wherein we are having this webinar today. I would just like to raise 2 issues at this stage. And the thing which I would like to highlight is that the present pandemic that has engulfed the whole world, and the whole world community is grappling, has given us a very strong message. In fact, it's the nature that has given us a very strong message that we've really messed it up over the last few decades. And what we are all going through now is largely because of the way we have managed ecosystems and biodiversity in the last 4 or 5 decades. So it raises a very pertinent point that the package, or the economic stimulus, which more or less every country is now announcing, including India, these, while their main objective is going to be revival, could it facilitate a shift towards a greener pathway of growth? That is the crux of today's webinar, and that's the crux of the discussion that is going on globally. Whether we can build back better in a more greener pathway of growth. Or are the measures so specific on economic stimulus and focus so much of economic revival that such an ambition would not be possible? Because that scenario is also there. And as we discuss the economic stimulus package today, a lot of these elements will certainly be coming out. And we basically, I think one question we need to look at is, are these elements be picked up and redirected towards greener or cleaner activities? I will try to give very simplistic a few examples of how some of the green activities can be introduced in the economic stimulus package. For example, can the government make affordable housing projects aligned with, for example, green building standards, reduce future energy needs? Could be an approach that the present stimulus package could integrate into. Can some of the infrastructure projects in the economic packages be developed in a climate resilient way? Can the green sector, such as sustainable agriculture or renewable energy or green transport or green construction, become the drivers for employment opportunities? I think the webinar is going to address what, if any, are the possibilities. And to look at such an array of topics and discussion points, we have a very good panel of speakers and also very good two moderators. This webinar will, of course, be addressed by Dr. Ashok Khoslaji, the eminent environmentalist, whom I also call my guru, and who's also the founder of Development Alternatives. My other guru, Dr. Ajay Mathur, Director General of TERI, is also going to talk to us today. I am especially pleased to have my old college friend and my batchmate C.K. Mishra, Secretary, retired from the Ministry of Environment, Forest and Climate Change, who really led the Ministry of Environment, Forest and Climate Change so effectively over the last couple of years. And they will be addressing us, and we'll also have a context setting by the three UN agencies, UNDP, UNIDO, and ILO. And I have my colleagues Rene, Kevin, and Nadia to be bringing in the UN context, how they see the economic stimulus package can be made more green. Then we have a very distinguished panel, which includes Naina Lal Kidwai. I don't need to introduce her. Everyone knows her. One of the India's most respected bankers and an authority on finance and sustainability. Unfortunately, Rajshri is not being able to join us today from the Department of Economic Affairs. We have Mr. Manish Chaurasia, Managing Director, Tata Cleantech Capital, a non-banking finance company pioneering in sustainable finance. We have Mr. G. Suri Babu, General Manager, Farm Sector Policy Development in NABARD. Dr. Rita Pandey, Senior Fellow in the National Institute of Public Finance and Policy. We also have Sunita Sanghi, Senior Advisor, Ministry of Skill Development and Entrepreneurship, as that is an area which really is going to be the key critical area in economic recovery. And we have finally Mrs. Malini Chakravarti, Additional Coordinator Research for Center for Budget and Governance Accountability. The panel discussion will be moderated by our partners, CPI, whose director, Mahua Acharya, is the Asia Director for Climate Policy Initiatives, and also assisted with by Zeenat Niazi from Development Alternatives. I am very happy to welcome you all for this very important webinar today, and would like to now give the floor to Ajay Mathur for his introductory remarks. Ajay.
It's a great privilege and honor to be with all of you here today. And I especially want to thank UNEP, CPI, and Development Alternatives for putting together this particular webinar on the green recovery. As I look at the green recovery, and I'll focus only on greening the energy part of the whole spectrum. As we look at the recovery package in India, for my own purposes, I break it up into three parts. The first is what I call as a relief package, that is to provide here and now benefits to people who are suffering. This includes the cash transfer, the food grain availability, and so on. And this is a cash availability of about $30 billion. Now, the next package is what I call the recovery package. This is what the Reserve Bank of India has made available to the banks and the NFBCs to largely provide them and through them to various organizations both the liquidity and the ability to sustain an extended period of essentially zero revenue inflows into the organizations. This is various moratoria, credit guarantees, etc., this is about $20 billion. The third and the largest part of the recovery package, which I call the economic stimulus, is towards enhancing credit to key sectors. And the goal of this is very clearly the goal of the government, and probably of all governments in all jurisdictions, is to create jobs, to create sustainable livelihoods, and to create economic growth. All those three things. This is about $200 billion, the largest of the three. But as I said, it's largely credit, largely towards the MSME sector, the agriculture sector, somewhat to other sectors, including a little bit to the power sector. So this, in my view, captures two large realities. The first is that the cash availability to the government, given its limited fiscal budget space, is very limited. And hence, the vast amount of recovery packages that are being put out are in the form of credit in areas, in sectors where job creation and economic growth are thought to happen. The second is the attention beyond the issue of relief and recovery on, as I said, jobs, sustainable livelihoods, and economic. So this is where we stand today. Now, to me, this provides a huge opportunity because the credit is there. The credit is there in areas like MSME and agriculture and so on. But in order to utilize credit, we need to bring equity to the table. To me, this is a huge opportunity. As we bring equity to the table, and whether it is Tata Clean Tech Capital, which brings this in, or whether it is international equity funds through multilateral banks, or through pension funds, or through private equity funds, it will be absolutely wonderful if this could be linked to green projects. Because if it is linked to green projects, then that is what will get done. That is what will pull credit that is available locally, especially in the MSME and the agriculture sector. So, for example, if you want to invest in energy efficiency in MSMEs, great sector, it enhances the productivity, banks like it, and the availability of equity and therefore of credit which it can pull in would be things that the MSME sector itself and the entire ecosystem would like. Their profitability will increase, their ability to repay their loans will increase. Similarly, if you're looking at the agriculture sector and, for example, look at the solar pump program, the KUSUM program. Again, creation of an equity for solar pumps could pull in credit and therefore help greatly enhance the solar pump program. It will create jobs, it will create sustainable livelihoods. These are not brown projects, these are green projects, these have got long lives. And obviously it will create economic growth. In other words, together, green equity plus the availability of credit in MSME and agriculture sector together has the chance to completely revamp our economy and revamp the energy sector so that in the years to come, it is far greener than what we have seen till now. I'll end here, and Atul, again, many, many thanks for having me on this panel. Thanks.
Thanks a lot, Dr. Mathur, and thanks a lot.
Thank you very much.
Thanks a lot for underlining the concept of green equity in agriculture and MSME sector, which can be used to leverage the credit and the credit enhancement. So now I turn to the other environmental guru. We are privileged to have Dr. Ashok Khosla with us, and he'll be speaking on natural capital, the best investment for universal prosperity and societal resilience. So Dr. Ashok Khosla.
Thank you, Anuba. Can we share? Can you put me on to share, or do I have a minute to?
Okay, sir, you can just start speaking. The IT guy will take care of it for making you share the screen.
Thank you. Let me know if I have to do something, because as far as I can see, there's nothing I can do.
Ashokji, you may have to be a little louder. We can't hear your voice properly.
Can you hear me now?
A little better.
little better, not good enough. I'm not sure I can do much better. I'm more or less shouting right now, but I'm also concerned about my presentation. Is it coming on? Is there some way to, can you see it right now?
Yes, sir, we see it.
Yes, we can see it.
We can see it.
All right. And you can, is that the right size, the screen? Now,
Yeah.
how do I move it forward? Is there a normal mechanism for moving it?
Sir, you just put it in slideshow mode.
Yes.
And
I'm trying to do that. Is that over here?
Sir, I have shared the screen, so you can let me know once you need to go to the next slide.
Oh, I can't operate it from here?
No, because you could not able to share it, so I have shared on your behalf.
Okay, so I'm going to be talking a little bit about one of the areas that I think is of concern. In a complex world like ours, and the complexity of the crises that we're facing, it's not just COVID, there are intrusions from across the borders by locusts, by all kinds of people. There's cyclones and super cyclones coming at us from all sides. Life is getting to be complicated. And I'm really going to talk about one thing, and I don't want it to be taken as a silver bullet to solve all problems. But it is one of the ones that has been most neglected and is one of the most important. And that is going back to basics and reviving the kind of natural capital that we inherited when we started this country many hundreds of thousands of years ago. And I believe that the best investments right now, post-COVID, are ones that will lead also to universal, to prosperity for all, and a society that is fairly resilient to the kinds of issues that we're dealing with. Next. Normal was an economy, a neoliberal economy, which was based essentially on a rationalization that we were being more and more efficient. And it was based on a neoclassical economics, so-called science, which was totally obsessed with growth. That was all that it mattered. Next. See, the problem with this was that all we did was our front pages, our business pages, all of them are filled with more FDI, more rising portfolios, more growth rates up, more higher Sensex. And it was all about growth at the expense of virtually everything, including resilience. And I think that's what we're paying such a heavy cost for, and in fact, counterproductively. And it was based also on next. Can I do it? No. Can you move the slides, please? Hello? Hello? Next. Yeah, on consumerism. Next. On a massive ecological footprint of basically raping Mother Earth for all she was worth. And what did we get? We got a world, next, of built on the champagne glass theory of life. A few, about 15, 20% in 1990. This is the picture from the report, the first Human Development Report in 1990 by UNDP, showing that about 85% of the world's wealth and income went really to the top 20%. And the bottom 50% got more or less 5 or 6%. A lot worse now. It's got so much worse that from champagne glass, yeah, go ahead, please, next. From the champagne glass, we've gone on to a bar stool, where virtually 1% owns as much as the rest of the country put together. Next. And what have we got from that affluenza? We've got influenza. Influenza is a disease that comes because we've been messing around too much with the natural ecosystem resiliences. Go ahead. And a result of that is that we've got both poverty and environmental breakdown and eco-refugees of both kinds. People who are running away from a broken economic system and from a destroyed ecosystem. Go ahead. And this little girl and her two brothers, one of them in her lap, are really simply asking, where do I go now? One has to ask, where were they even before? And the next one is this very rich guy who's also facing the same kind of a breakdown. These are people called biosphere people, people who live off the whole planet's resources. The little girl before her, we would call ecosphere resource people who live on the local ecosystem for survival. So let me go on next. So what is it? What kind of an India do we want? Seems to me we could all of us agree that we want an India where we have healthy, fulfilled, next, empowered people, next, and a vibrant economy, which is based on the judicious use of natural resources, manufacturing, services, trade, investments. Go ahead, next. I'm sorry, this next business is a bit of a nuisance. And jobs for everyone, as Ajay just said, that's the primary concern of every level of society. Next, but most important of all, we need to maintain our forests. Next, just please keep going, just going. Our rivers and streams. Next, our wetlands, our soils and land, our physical infrastructure and the built environment. Go ahead. Next. And of course, our culture and heritage. In other words, we must now nurture all types of capital, human, physical, financial, of course, but most important, natural. For the last 70 years, all we've been really worrying about is the financial and a little bit about the physical capital. So now, post-COVID, we're now looking for new solutions, and they won't be based, they cannot be based on neoclassical economics, nor on neoliberal economies. Go ahead. So what does this girl hope for? What is the kind of life she's going to have when she grows up? Please go ahead. I'm going to make the case that biodiversity and ecosystem services, nature, is where the biggest attention is now needed. Biodiversity is hugely valuable in providing the world with all kinds of services, food, materials, pharmaceuticals, pollination, recreation, building soils, and flood control, and 100 other things. Next. To give you one example of how valuable it is, one vulture has been calculated to have the value to society of 6 lakhs per year if the work it does were done by human beings, if they were paid normal salaries. This was a recent calculation by IUCN. Next. About 35% of the human food comes from pollinated foods, plants. About 100,000 species help us with all this. And the value of that, about 20 years ago, go ahead, please, next, was around $7-8 billion in the value of the pollination action of activity. It led to crops valued at 24 billion. The same applies to pharmaceuticals, except it's bigger. In the U.S., next. In the U.S., one before. All right, the value of the ecological services was estimated in 1999 by a bunch of 18 international economists from all over the world to be somewhere in the range of $16 to $54 trillion at the time. At that time, next, the GDP of the whole world, the global gross net product was 20 trillion. So actually the nature was contributing and subsidizing the human economy by more than 100%. Go ahead, next. So just wanted to make the case that what we really need is resilience. You can't get resilience unless you have very strong and very resilient natural systems. And our trend in the last 40, 50, 60 years has not been very reassuring in this regard. And I'd like to make a strong case for us to be making much, much stronger investments in nature. Thanks.
Thanks, Dr. Khosla, for that extremely thought-provoking presentation, which emphasized the valuation of natural capital, which is not factored in our GDP as of now. Thank you very much. We are honored to have Mr. C.K. Mishra with us, the former Secretary to the Government of India, Minister of Environment, Forest and Climate Change. Sir, over to you.
Can you hear me?
Yes, sir.
So thank you very much for having me over. And thank you to UNEP, UNIDO, and all other organizations which are involved with this. After two extremely thought-provoking presentations by the two very eminent persons that we had just now, Mr. Ajay Mathur and Mr. Ashok Khosla, I actually feel a bit of an intruder, because that professionalism which comes from them should actually translate into policy in government, which hasn't happened with the kind of speed that it should have. But this is a topic which is very interesting because this is the future. And that is why I would like to share some of my general views with you so that we can take this forward. And when the very, very eminent analysts discuss this, they keep that in mind. See, for a little while, and I'll also like to compliment UNEP, because when we got into this understanding with UNEP on page, the idea was that we will create new concepts and ideate in such a way that the future growth will be far greener than what we have done in the past. I must say that we haven't yet delivered on it, but I guess we are in the right direction to take it forward, and I must thank UNEP for this. In this background, today's discussion is extremely, extremely relevant, because this is an opportunity for us to sit back, look back, and see where we've gone wrong and what we need to do for the future. In a way, we need to redesign development now. And this is an opportunity knocking at our doors where we have a new beginning, where the thought process for redesigning can start. Development process will continue to speed up. But if we can redesign our process itself, perhaps we will enter into a much greener sphere than what we have been doing today. What the pandemic has done is that it has shown what disastrous consequence can be there of human interference with nature. But it has also, as many people say, that one of the gains of the pandemic has been the greening, has been the clean rivers, the birds chirping all over, the blue skies and what have you, and a general overall improvement in the environment. I would like to just remind viewers that it's a good thing that has happened, but at the kind of cost that it has happened, I would not like to happen again at this cost. But the learning from the pandemic is that we now know what we really need to do to make it much better. What did the pandemic teach us? It really taught us that there are a few issues like combustion which we really need to handle. How do you do that? If you want to restart a green economy, how do you do that? There are two very critical things that we need to keep in mind. One is green technologies, and the other is resources that it will take to put those green technologies in. All the UN agencies are here, so with an apology, I'll say that the global alliances, which were supposed to partner and build these green technologies and bring about resources, have not done it the way they were expected to do. So now it is left to most of the countries to take it the way forward in their little effort and in their own way. So when you talk about green technologies, you are really looking at the aspect of technology which is in the existing development process, in the existing infrastructure and industry, and you're looking at technologies where newer things are going to come up in forms of newer development signatures. So they will both be different, but both will require technology. And if we want to really infuse technology and get into technology, there are two things that I would say are critical. One is innovation, and the second is partnership. And partnership more because it is not possible for any entity, be it government, be it civil society, be it the think tanks, to do it alone. So there has to be a partnership, both local and global, in order to take these green technologies forward. Now we come to the next part, which is resources. I mean, particularly in the context of India, the government of India has taken a decision long back that irrespective of what resource you get from the globe, we will put in enough resources to try and see that we move towards a greener economy, and the renewable energy and other things are examples of that. But we are here to talk about the resources that have been made available by government in the wake of pandemic. As Dr. Ajay Mathur was rightly pointing out, some of it is, of course, in terms of assistance to people for life, for livelihood. The other is towards the industry. So I would like to just pick up three things where I see possibility. And if you ask me for an answer, whether this kind of resource mobilization that is happening and the money that is being spent will actually convert into green technologies, it's yes and no. Yes, because it has a potential of doing it, and no, because I'll come to that later, because we have not spelt it out that way. Let us take three sectors where funding is going, whether it is credit or it is a subsidy or whatever form resources are going. Let us look at housing, for example. It is the critical time for us to now say that all the rural and urban housing that we are constructing from the government side under our programs must adhere to green technologies. When we were doing the India Cooling Action Plan, this was one of our main concerns. And the document, if you go through it, clearly provides for the fact that housing must have these factors inbuilt into it. We'll have to change perhaps a few codes and perhaps a few norms. But I think this is the time when we must sit and do it. Because once the entire tragedy is over and we are through with it, perhaps we'll get more busy with other things than to think of green economy. The second is MSMEs. The revival of MSMEs with low-cost technology is perhaps the lowest hanging fruit that we can get. MSMEs, by definition, have green technology inbuilt into them. It's not very resource intensive, and the MSMEs can actually prove through local technologies and innovations at a local level that they will reduce the emission and they will build a green economy. The third element that I would like to factor in, that if you look at the entire package, one substantial bit is coming from the Camper Fund. Why did Camper Fund get included in it? There's a reason. Because one of the thinking was that apart from all this physical infrastructure and the livelihood issues, we need to focus on green work. Therefore, close to 6,000 crores was allocated out of Camper Fund for forest, for biodiversity, for ecology, for wildlife, so that we factor all these things in and we are able to bring about a holistic economy which is far greener than it was in the past. So these are some of the arguments where one could say that yes, there is a potential and some amount of thinking which has gone into this package to make a greener economy. But I say no, because there is no inherent inbuilt strategy. I don't think we can go on a greener path without a specific strategy. It cannot be a generalized development norm that will take us there. And that strategy is a process which is missing in this. The entire package is about general economic activity. It's about restarting, redoing, rebooting. But we need to realize that both in the brown field and the green field, we need to put in green technologies. And this is an opportunity. And with this fiscal stimulus, perhaps we can set aside some amount deliberately to do this. And this is what I mean when I say we need to have a strategy. What we ultimately need to do really is to redesign. And this redesigning is very critical. It is this new design where innovative minds will need to come together, and then they will have to put together a low-cost development model where these things will get taken care of, and we'll have to harness the nature's gift to us to the extent that it should be, so that we have a greener economy. I'm sure the eminent panelists that are here this as a background kind of a thing. My thought process may be correct, maybe not, but something that we need to think on is how do we redesign this package, because we have not fully designed it the way we want it if it is a green economy. But one thought that I would like to leave with all of you is that in this entire discussion, we've been talking about sustainable development. Whenever we talk about industries, whenever we talk about, I see the questions coming on biodiversity. So the entire emphasis is on sustainable development. I think now is the time after COVID when we need to spare some time to start talking about sustainable consumption. It is the sustainable consumption and the change in lifestyle which will now lead to a greener place, greener economy. Sustaining the gains from this lockdown is not going to be easy one. So we need to put in a new mechanism in place where we can redesign the entire thing. And I hope the panelists will have a discussion on this and hope they will have some answers on this. Thank you very much.
Thank you, sir. Thanks for highlighting the importance of green technologies as well as the green resources, and also putting it on the table that we cannot move in this direction of greening the package without an inherent strategy, which at present is somewhat lacking. So may I now call upon Dr. Renee Van Berkel, the UNIDO representative for the regional office in India. So Renee, over to you.
Yes, thank you very much, and good afternoon to all. I think, first of all, UNIDO is pleased to be part of PAGE and indeed of today's webinar. UNIDO is the specialized agency. We are linked to SDG 9, which is infrastructure, industry, and innovation. And I think our mandate is to make innovation and industrialization work for markets, so products that are sought after, for people, so decent works, and also for the environment, climate, and resources. And the PAGE UNIDO works basically on green industry, and then we see two components. One is the greening of existing industries with such practices as resource efficiency, energy efficiency, cleaner production. And then the second one is creating new green industries, which basically have environmental goods and services as their main business proposition. So that's the clean tech innovation and entrepreneurship. Both are strong pillars of UNIDO's work in India. And on the PAGE in India, UNIDO, working closely with ILO, the colleagues are also on the call, is focusing on driving and shaping inclusive green transformation towards resource efficiency and resource circularity in key manufacturing sectors, textiles and garments, food processing, leather and footwear. Specifically to the COVID crisis, UNIDO has zoomed in on the MSMEs, micro, small and medium enterprises, as these appear to have been particularly hard hit. So some recent surveys covering about 46,000 MSMEs indicated that 1 out of 3 entrepreneurs considers their business beyond recovery. That translates into 20 million MSMEs going out of business in 2020. We did some surveys on the MSME clusters that we work with, and we basically came that these challenges are around five areas. First of all, and nobody would be surprised, is that the amount of uncertainty looking forward in the markets and society. So what is going to happen with the pandemic, with the global economy? And this risk, this uncertainty is not good for business. And secondly is that what is already being referred to, that markets have basically collapsed or plummeted overnight. So there's demand came from 100 down to 0. And to recover that is taking its time. Third component is related to the workforce, and that we have seen the reverse migration. We have seen people running away for their livelihoods and unwilling to come back and take up jobs which they had before. So there's a need to rebuild the workforce. The fourth component, which is there and maybe has not been emphasized enough, is the fact that equipment and goods and inventories have decayed over 2 or 3 months, and they are not yet any longer of the same value as they had before the unlock. And that fifthly, there is what happened already before the lockdown, is that supply chains were disrupted and companies were already slowing down because critical supplies from China were not coming in. These all 5 erode the liquidity position and fueled requests for cash injections. However, cash is not enough, so MSMEs indeed need to rebuild their business. In view thereof, UNIDO and partners have already developed and launched a knowledge portal to assist MSMEs to restart, recover, and revitalize business, building back business from crisis, B3C MSMEs. It's online at b3cmsme.org. But fundamentally, economic recovery requires markets and product demand to pick up. Businesses, including MSMEs, need a working capital of cash to avail of labor, energy, and materials to produce. Recovery finance can at best be the ignition, the starter for the restarting the economy. UNIDO is very concerned that the economic recovery package for MSMEs is insufficiently strategic to create markets and to replicate at scale. The infusion of cash may evaporate in 3 or 6 months, and in the absence of strategy may result in limited recovery. This is augmented by weaknesses that already existed in the MSME sector and value chains pre-COVID that have just been exacerbated. They have just been revealed by the pandemic and the lockdown. I would like to highlight maybe 2. Firstly, MSME financing is largely through informal and non-banking sector, so perhaps up to 85%. So if you avail credit through the markets, through credits and loans, it will only reach out to the 15% of the MSMEs that are in the formal system in terms of their financing. So only the ones who are relatively well off can avail of the government support to rebuild their business. A second one, which has also been highlighted, is of course the way how we have set up global value chains, and they largely operate on a cash basis and put MSME suppliers under financial duress and risk, as brands are only paying when goods are supplied and basically in the shop in Europe or Japan or Australia. So this means that MSMEs are largely pre-financing their goods to the large brands. And we see now also that brands have taken their liberty to basically cancel orders for things which have already been manufactured or which are already in a container somewhere on the oceans, or things which are already in the shop and ask discounts. So we need also to rethink the global value chain. I very much like the comments of Mr. Mishra saying that we have now funds available, and Mr. Ajay Mathur as well, in a sense that we need to have now strategy that this money is flowing in the right directions. So I think that if we talk 3 points I would like to make in that regard. So we talk about economic recovery and stimulus. We need to also talk about a return on investment. So this is a public investment, and the money that's now being availed is dense into the future reserves, which we can spend on health, on education, on other issues. So we need to make sure that the stimulus package pays back to society, pays back to SDGs. So we think that much more needs to be done, what I would call then basically making the stimulus funding performance-based. So you're in terms of retaining jobs, improving workplace diversity, occupational health and safety, reducing waste, energy and resource consumption. So loans should not by default be free or interest-free, but it can be made interest-free if you perform to a certain standard level. And maybe if you exceed these performance levels, you can be qualified to get part of your loan converted into a grant. So if you convert it largely to renewable energies, maybe some of the loan that you took out now could be converted to a grant. Secondly, I think more emphasis is needed perhaps on creating demand, because if we look historically, then the way economies have come out of crisis is through government procurement and large projects. I'm not really immediately saying that we need large, big projects. It can also be big in terms of many beneficiaries. There are structural challenges that hold India back in many areas, and these could be addressed. Direct economic recovery spending towards, for example, the WASH, Swachh Bharat mission, so water, sanitation, health would have a benefit. Look at waste management that can be improved, renewable energy, affordable housing, and sustainable urbanization. So we invest in these sectors. They tend to be labor intensive. We create jobs and we get the economic engine going. My third suggestion is related to basically let us grasp the rural and regional opportunity. By and large, the reverse migration that we've seen so far has resulted in a net inflow of skills in rural and regional areas, or areas where migrants have traditionally come from. And those are the areas where there's opportunity also for sustainable agriculture, for sustainable value chain development. So could we zoom in on creating opportunities for those who prefer to stay back now? They would prefer to stay with their families and build the opportunities. We would reduce the stress on the cities, on urbanization, and we can do something with our rural livelihoods, with our natural capital, as Ashok was referring to. I think there are good opportunities that we could look finally at making a dent in the post-harvest losses of our agri-food production. So we create incentives for farmers to grow more because there is capacity to pay for it and to process it. But we could also look in this in terms of the waste streams that are around in the urban and in the rural areas. The paddy straw, the banana fiber, the bamboo, and develop waste to value the value streams and products out of this. So with these three recommendations, so make the funding performance-based so that we get a strategy in place to use the finance. Think about investing and creating markets by government investment spending on the social sectors, on WASH, waste management and related sectors. And thirdly, let's zoom in on the economic opportunity that is created by reverse migration and do something on the rural and regional level. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Rene, for making those very strong points about what plagues the already cash-strapped MSME sector and what are the constraints in restarting, recovering, and revitalizing the sector. Also, for talking about the local opportunities, the return on investment for the package, and also about the reverse migration, which we have seen to a very large extent in India happening. And on that note, may I now call upon Ms. Nadia Rashid, the Deputy Resident Representative, UNDP India.
Thank you very much, Anuba. Let me first start by saying what an honor it is to join this extremely distinguished panel. And of course, we're very proud to be partnering with UN agencies and other colleagues on the PAGE initiative. As we've all been discussing, we're really living through an unprecedented time. We're seeing that development progress is under extremely severe threat. In fact, for the first time since it was first developed, the expectation is that the Human Development Index is going to see a drop in 2020. So that is 30 years since we started measuring human development, and this year we are expecting to see setbacks, of course, across health, living standards, and education indicators, which will really be a reflection of how dire the situation has been globally and how serious this crisis has been. Needless to say, we are now already witnessing over 500,000 deaths globally, and the World Bank is estimating that up to 100 million people could be pushed into extreme poverty in 2020. So the impacts of this crisis are really putting governments around the world in a very, very difficult situation, and they're under immense pressure to firstly control the virus, which in many, many places is still raging, with many questions over how it will shift further. And at the same time, under pressure to really restart and recover economic life, given these extreme impacts that we've seen. And so there's very difficult choices that need to be made. And so now is really a critical moment to think about those choices and how do we reset towards a more environmentally sustainable and inclusive growth pathway, rather than continuing on down the line that has gotten us into so much trouble. So shifting a little bit to speak about the work that UNDP is doing in India. In terms of our response to COVID, we're currently, of course, focusing on supporting the immediate response, and that includes working with government partners on strengthening health systems, for example, by support to capacity building, to procurement of essential products. We're also working with partners on mitigating the severe social and economic crisis that we've been talking about, the impacts that we've been speaking about, particularly in terms of support to livelihoods and support to expanding access to social protection. And thirdly, we're also supporting multi-sectoral coordination and inclusive responses to really help, particularly at the state level, state governments pull in the multiple stakeholders and sectors that need to be involved in both addressing the crisis and responding in the longer term. And underpinning this approach for us is the need to very, very strongly focus on environmental sustainability and how we can build resilience both in response and longer term recovery efforts. So with our page partners, the key areas that we're focusing on are firstly, how do we boost green and resilient recovery by helping to translate and integrate climate commitments into urban planning, into agriculture, into land use solutions. Secondly, how do we make sure that we're investing in and protecting nature-based jobs and livelihoods, including in rural entrepreneurship? And this is absolutely critical, as Renee has just mentioned. And third, supporting a green energy transition as part and parcel of the COVID response, and not missing this opportunity to have a reset in terms of the way we're responding. It's really critical that these approaches promote community-based solutions, promote community-owned solutions and approaches, and to ensure that the communities that are most vulnerable are really part of these solutions, part of developing and implementing these solutions. And I'd like to share just a couple of examples of the work that we are currently doing to bring these approaches to life and to ensure that we are implementing these approaches. The first example I'd like to mention is a partnership with DFID and with civil society organizations working across 30 districts with district administrations and state administrations on an infrastructure for climate resilience growth project. Now, this was a project that we had initiated before the COVID crisis hit, but it really has been a very important opportunity for us to expand and replicate this partnership, to look at how to expand reach of social protection schemes, particularly through rural public works schemes, so through NREGA, working with local administrations to expand access, particularly to returning migrant workers and other vulnerable communities, but with a very specific focus on water conservation and augmentation works, horticulture, animal husbandry. So this is really, the type of approach that allows us to have dual benefits, both in terms of enhancing livelihoods and providing essential support to poor families, essential economic support to poor families, while at the same time advancing environmental goals. The second example I'd like to mention is an initiative called Disha, where we work with the Ikea Foundation. And through this initiative, we've been partnering with government, private sector, and civil society partners to invest in local jobs and livelihoods, working with MSMEs, but also bringing attention to nature-based jobs and livelihoods, because this is the way that we can really provide the widest possible access to long-term opportunities, particularly for women and vulnerable communities. And this is an approach that we've been working on for some time. In fact, over the past 5 years, we've supported 1 million women and girls through this initiative with skilling, with employment and entrepreneurship opportunities. But COVID has had a particularly adverse impact on women, and we're seeing that women are losing jobs at a faster pace. And so it's very critical that our responses really also include women as equal partners, both in addressing socioeconomic needs and in working towards a more sustainable post-COVID future. So to summarize, it is absolutely imperative that we respond to the immediate impacts of COVID while also taking a longer-term perspective. That is essential. This is an immediate crisis, but it also requires us to look at the longer-term perspective and to really promote an integrated approach that can help guide economic recovery and green recovery, because it's absolutely essential that this is the time to make that shift. So I'll just conclude by saying that we very much look forward to working with all of you and to listening to this discussion, to look at how we can continue to advocate together, continue to scale up solutions together, to ensure that we are pushing for a more sustainable and inclusive path to recovery. And it's also an essential opportunity for us to really recommit to the commitment of the Sustainable Development Goals for addressing an integrated vision to development and committing to leave no one behind. And this is absolutely essential that we don't let these commitments drop off as we deal with the immediate needs of this crisis. So thank you so much, and I look forward to the discussion. And back to you, Anuba.
Thank you so much, Nadia, for giving the UNDP perspective and also for telling us about the subnational engagements and also engaging with the rural employment guarantee schemes, etc., and for community-based solution and addressing the vulnerabilities. So thank you so much, Nadia. So our next page partner is International Labour Organization, and it is being represented by Mr. Kelvin Sargent, the Enterprise Specialist, Decent Work Team for South Asia and the Country Office for India, ILO. So Kelvin, over to you.
Thank you. Good afternoon, good morning, wherever you are, everyone. The ILO is also pleased to be associated with this webinar, looking at the whole package and to see whether and how we can build back better. The ILO, as you know, or you may not know, is really a specialized agency of the United Nations, of course, focusing on issues of employment and jobs and all other kinds of areas. And therefore, we are very pleased to be associated with this webinar here today. I think when we think of the pandemic really and the amount of lives that have been destroyed and livelihoods in so many sectors, agriculture, manufacturing, services, tourism, you name it, so much livelihoods have been affected. And the MSME sector, I've heard so much about the MSME sector today, and both the formal and let us not forget the informal sector. In India, for example, there is a large informal sector. Over 90% of the businesses in India are informal, and therefore by implications it means that the jobs are also informal. Lots of the jobs in India are also informal jobs, and they have been affected tremendously, by this, this pandemic, this COVID that continues to, create havoc around all over the globe. India, no less so. But I think, the government has come up with a stimulus package, and very rightly so, it contains a number of elements that we've already heard about today. And I think certainly greening the economy and green jobs has to be an option for development. I can't see us, not talking about, transforming the economy and whatnot, and not thinking about the greening and green sectors and green jobs. I think already in the ILO, we've done a lot of work, for example, in the green economy. We've done work in the Noriega program, for example, on employment intensive investment programs. Let us not forget already as well, in impact insurance. On the financial side, there's the impact insurance. And I agree with other colleagues in terms of renewable energy, the waste management sector, including electronic waste, tremendous opportunities there. Green transport, converting public buses into vehicles using cleaner fuel or making them battery operated, using solar, green construction. We heard a lot about all of these things which are possible, and I think tremendous opportunities exist for some of these things to happen. I think also that let us not also forget the importance of, as we talk about green jobs and transforming the economy, we need to talk about green skills as well. Because you cannot talk about the green jobs without having the skills and the education and the TVET system also aligned to the changes that you want in the society. This is also part of the transformation. In India, together with the paid agencies, the ILO is committed to working in India for the next 3 to 4 years on the page. We believe in the ILO that new green jobs must contain elements of what we call just transition as well. Because as we transform the economy, as we do changes to the economy, new jobs will be created, some jobs will be lost, some jobs will be transformed. But whatever we do, we need to take into consideration the issue of just transition, that no one must be left behind, that we must think about everybody as we do the transition and the changes and as we seek to transform the economy. Now, as I talk about just transition also, I'm really talking about sustainable development, which is a human-centered approach to the future of work. Therefore, within this context, United Nations Secretary General and the ILO and leaders of governments, employers, and workers launched a Climate Action for Jobs initiative in Madrid in 2019 to provide a roadmap to support and give effect to the commitments made by countries at the Climate Action Summit of September the 19th. The ILO will spearhead this initiative, and we expect also India to be invited to be part of this initiative. Now, I think I want to make a number of points as we go forward. The transition to green economy must, as I said, be just and equitable. We must try to leave no one behind as we shift towards greener pathways for growth and development. So the women, the migrant workers, people with disability, and the less fortunate in society also need to be taken care of and to be considered as we transform to this green economy. Secondly, skills training will become very important, okay? And therefore, we also need to take into consideration, apart from skills training, very important will be the question of productivity. A lot of the times we talk about improving jobs and doing things, and we forget about the issue of productivity and productivity improvement. And that is why the education system, all right, and the school system and your TVET system and whatnot, and even the on-the-job training and all of these things need to also focus very carefully on the question of productivity. So as we seek to transform the economy and make it more human-centered, make it more resilient, as we try to build back better, accepting that green development and green economy must be an option for development, I think we also need to ensure that the transition must be just, it must be fair, it must be equitable, and it must seek to leave no one behind. Thank you. I'll stop there.
Thanks a lot, Kelvin, for talking about the green jobs and the green skills and also about the just transition. So now we move on to the panel discussion, and we have a very distinguished panel and an equally distinguished moderator. So it's being moderated by Mahua Acharya, the Asia Director of Climate Policy Initiative. Over to you, Mahua.
Thank you, Anuba. Thank you. I must first congratulate you and Atul and Zenat and others for putting this whole thing together, and all the speakers. What a fantastic lineup. If there were a prize for casting directors, as they call it in Bollywood, I think all three of you would get it. Atul has introduced the panel, so I won't go into doing that. I'm also a little bit aware and conscious of the time. For the sake of the audience, I should perhaps let the audience know that I have been watching, in fact, the questions coming up on the right-hand side of my screen. I will put them into different, I'll allocate them according to who perhaps is best positioned to respond to them. And I thought in the interest of this panel, what I would do, starting with Naina and others, Atul has given a really nice contextual background to this panel. We started off, just to repeat that, we started off by saying, well, although the stimulus package, the goal of the stimulus package is plain economic revival, could it be used to shift towards a greener pathway of growth? Or is it that the measures contained in that package are just so specific that things are already set in stone? Can you do something different downstream from there? Because there are lots of elements in the package which are fairly high level and they need to go through the administrative system. And is there a possibility to make some changes out there? So in this kind of context, I thought I'll start perhaps with Naina. And I'll just put the questions out there to the panel, and please just let me know. I don't know if there's a hand raising system on WebEx, but just pipe in and let me know, and I might even ask the keynote speakers before me, if you'd like to respond to something, please just do the same. So Naina, let me start with you. The government's response so far in this package has been, of course, has been a bit of a rescue nature, if I can call it that. That is to provide immediate relief for companies. Pre-lockdown, the economy was not doing so well, and of course things came to a complete standstill during the lockdown. And so, to some extent, those first steps, you can say, have been taken. So, in your view, what should happen next? And just remember, I'm kind of asking these questions from the point of view of, is this a time in our system where we can do a bit of course correction? So, course correction, of course, towards greener, more inclusive, technologically superior, so on and so forth. So, what in your views should happen next?
So, Mawa, let me start by saying what I really appreciated by all the speakers that went ahead of me right now was the hope. And I feel better than when I joined, because I actually at stages have despaired that as the agenda going forward comes to rescue this green agenda that was beginning to gain momentum may actually slow down. And why do I think that? Let me just come down to the points, because there's enough out there in terms of policy, and we heard it through a lot of the speakers as to what was set out there already. The issue now is on execution, and can we jumpstart it to be better than where we were in the pre-COVID environment? And that's where I worry. So the one good thing that has emerged is the work from home. And it's a good one because it will stay. I can tell you across the boards I sit on in the companies I'm engaged with, each one has absolutely bought into the work from home. Some have committed 50% of their staff for the future going forward, not just for as an immediate solution. Others like, TCS was the big surprise with the lakhs of people that they employ, that they have committed that over till 2025, they will actually have 90 plus jobs in a work from home format, etc. And why is that good? I mean, we know it means less flights, it means less people on the road, and all of that is a very good thing. So that's the biggest win that comes, because it's forced us into a digitized environment and the comfort of dealing with formats such as we're on right now. Now, as corporates go, I think we have to look at what are the win-wins, because at a time like this, when their own survival and their profits are under stress, what are the win-wins? And the obvious win-wins will be around energy efficiency. So that's a good agenda. It plays, yes, into renewables, but it also plays into them ensuring that their costs stay down. Now, the counter to that is, does a China stoppage of cheap solar panels raise the price of renewables? And what does that do to this equation? So there's so much changing out there that we have to make sure that the easy wins, the wins on energy efficiency, are critical, because they bring with it the benefit not just to the corporate, but to the environment. The second win I would see is just the fact that companies are desperate now to raise money, and a lot of it coming through equity. And the good news is also from foreign equity. And foreign equity has driven change across large companies in particular extremely well, because the sovereign funds, the Norges banks, now we've seen this for Blackstone, others are insisting on a degree of environment compliance, green sustainability, which I think is going to drive companies that want to access capital to ensure that they meet that. So more of this kind of equity activity. I hope that we can get our own life insurance corporations and Indian equity institutions to have similar policies. And that, I think, is something where we who work in the space should be focused to get those systems in, because as companies raise equity, let's make sure it goes to those that deserve it most, because they give more to the environment than they take away. And in the same vein, the credit enhancements that are being provided, some of it is coming from multilateral, bilateral institutions, always embrace high environment. Can we make sure that those instruments of finance are underpinned by green formats, so that the money goes, but it to those that need it, yes, but it goes to those that have a minimum level of compliance to the sort of things that we would like to see. I think another big win for us going forward is, and I think Renee captured this, is the whole water and sanitation space. I think the government had been quite committed to this through Swachh Bharat. Some of us who work in the wash and sanitation space actually were beginning to get nervous that the focus of the ministry now into more plastic waste management was going to be dropping the ball on what was needed in terms of sewage treatment and continuing the communication on wash. The good news is I have never seen such high intensity of wash your hands, hygiene as even at the height of our SBM wash agenda. So it's right back there. And hey, you're going to need water to wash. And so again, the whole environment focus, hygiene, health, and the interconnections with the provision of water, drinking water, conservation of water is key. And I'm really happy to see that companies that have engaged, and very well typically, in communities around the factories that they have, that spend has not gone down, even though it came from CSR budgets, which are now shrinking. Because the importance of knowing that the community around where their factories are being healthy is critical for the health of their own factory and workers, is a critical win-win. So we can help to just push these at the micro level to assist, aid, show companies the way on how engaging with communities keeps them healthy, keeps the communities healthy, and therefore the benefit back to the corporate. So really self-serving is what I'm saying. For those that are altruistic and converted, they'll do the right thing anyway. I think regulation, yes, BS6 has stayed on the agenda despite all the pressure that we were seeing in terms of the car manufacturing sector pre-COVID beginning to collapse. So that's good. But, we've got a problem out there right now in terms of public transport and the perception, it shut down, but even as it comes back, the perception of each individual's own fear of being packed in to public transport. And it's sadly showing up right now in terms of a huge burst in terms of small car purchase. And it is being explained, some of it, yes, might be pent-up demand, but it is being explained in terms of people preferring to have that own safe environment to move around in. Not just the necessity, because public transport is there now, because that's short term, but longer term as well. And that is not good for what we talk in terms of city planning and effective public transportation. Although hopefully the work from home just means there are fewer people running around in different directions. I fear compliance will go out the window. When an MSME in particular, I think the big companies, because they're dependent on foreign capital and all the reasons I've given, will stay the course by and large. The MSMEs who are already feeling the regulatory burden of complying with treat your sewage, manage your plastic, etc., and they were crying for help even before the pandemic, are now in a position where they find it extremely hard to put out the capital. And I think here government has to step in, or the municipalities, to set up a shared resource, say in an industrial zone, where you build the company like a utility and provide the service. The model earlier was the company had to do it for itself. So small companies in particular were finding it quite hard to put out the capital. So we have to rethink that model, and government has to be a partner to that, because otherwise it won't happen. And recovery can happen over time by the billing that happens. And of course, very tough regulation and execution on regulation, so people can't buy their way out of the issue. I would just say we have to keep pushing on audit, on rating, on making sure that companies declare what they're doing in a format that everyone can understand. Right now, there are very creative books that companies are producing on all the good things they're doing. But, what can I measure? And I'm on a board which has totally signed in, for example, to a science-based target initiative as it exists, SBTI, as it exists abroad. And I'm all in favor of stuff like that, where the measure is known, an external agency signs off on the fact that the company is truly on a reduction of 2 degrees as per COP21 by all the initiatives it's taking. And in that particular case, the company I'm referring to is Lafarge Holcim, in the sector like cement, which you well know is very, very carbon intensive. But how well can they do in terms of their commitment to that going forward? So my fears, as I said, MSME compliance, and I would just add, even in biodiversity and conservation, I worry if there are less eyes and ears out there in the COVID environment. I'm a big fan of tourism that kept an eye and kept the forest officers on their toes. What is happening in and around our forests in terms of conservation? And what is this new coal mining agenda going to do to that? So I think we're at a crossroads. I don't necessarily share the hope that we will have what was a great agenda emerging in terms of the buy-in from more and more people, continuing at the level it did in the pre-COVID environment. And I think it is for all of us here, which I suspect I'm preaching to the converted, to make sure that people don't forget about it, that it's not just about lip service, it's about what we have to do here and now. And I think there were some great examples set out by people like Renee and others on what could happen here and now to ensure we don't lose the plot in the near term.
Thank you for that, Naina. Thank you. You've made a fantastic plethora of, if I can call it, all the issues that are kind of burning, that are perhaps not being discussed as much as they should. Although I agree with you, I do feel more hopeful now than I was at the time of getting into the panel. There are a number of issues, Naina, you raised, which they provide a nice little segue for our next speaker, Manish. I had some of these in my mind anyway to be asking Manish. So let me just move over to Manish. Let me pick up from some points that Naina raised here, which I know will be applicable, I think will be applicable to you in your current role and in your past experience. Starting backwards, and Manish, since you've got so much of experience in the renewable energy sector and green finance, let me ask you, from the point of view of, well, not just the stimulus package, I'm talking about the depressed demand after COVID. What is going to happen? I mean, what are your views on future solar? There is, can you comment on things like that? There's a very large chunk of money promised in the package to be given out to discoms. A lot of that is in fact arrears. A lot of companies have been owed that. But then you've got the coal mining thing coming up in parallel. We've just heard of imports to solar panels. How does that all fit in together as far as we were concerned on increasing the amount of renewable power on the grid?
Sure. Yeah, so it's a very pertinent question, especially after what Naina Madam has said. So see, there are three parts to your question, so I'll take the first one. So we are talking about coal on one hand and renewable energy on the other. Now, in the Indian context, it may not be very good to link the two. I'll explain why. See, one is that today, if you see the demand in India in terms of the units, it's about 1,300 billion units. And the penetration of renewable is about 11%. Now, next year, of course, we are going to see contraction in demand. But after that, demand should grow by around 6% till at least 25. Now, if that is the rate of growth in demand, then we will need about 1,600 billion units in FY25. With all the projects which are coming in renewable, probably our penetration will go to 20%. What it means is that 80% power will still come from the non-renewable sources. So as much as we hate coal, we won't be able to avoid it till FY25 or maybe even beyond, unless there's a disruption in the technology, which is also possible. So essentially what is happening is that in India, you are still importing a lot of coal, almost 200 million tons per annum last year. And that is leading to a lot of cost in terms of foreign exchange, almost about I think 2 lakh crores. So the point here is that when you already have so much coal in the country, why should you spend on the foreign exchange? In any case, you can't completely avoid the coal. But the silver lining in this is that the incremental usage of coal will increase very little. And probably by about FY25, it will stabilize. So that is the context behind, I think, opening up the mining sector. Though it has its negative, but then it has to be seen in the realistic perspective. Now, other thing is that what about the renewables? What about the increase in the duty on solar? And what about this, restricted countries from which the imports cannot be done? So that is clearly a geopolitical issue, and that's a negative to the sector because of the fact that 80% panels in the country are being imported from China. But having said that, I'm hopeful that once the country realizes, and it is realizing that how important is manufacturing, and when there's a concerted effort to increase the manufacturing of modules and panels in India, then hopefully the supply will go up. Having said that, we have a huge distance to cover. Today, the manufacturing in India of the panels is just about 3 gigawatts. And we are talking about each year implementation. Now it is happening around 7-8 gigawatts of solar. And we are talking about going to 15-20 gigawatts. So there's a huge distance to be covered. So that is absolutely right. But I think that there will be progress along those lines.
Thank you, Manish. I mean, again, between you and Naina, there's just so many questions I've got back for this, but I'm just very careful. I'm very sensitive to time. So let me just go through the panel again. Because again, once again, you have also raised questions which are pertinent to the rest of the panel and others on the panel. Let me just pick up on your point about manufacturing. And perhaps I can ask Sunita. I can't see her. I'll just make sure she's...
I'm there. I'm there.
Sunita, are you there?
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay. Hi, Sunita. Hi.
Hi.
I'm trying to pick up on a question that which I thought I would ask you anyway. But Manish has already brought this up, and this is to do with manufacturing. You see, so in the solar, we're talking more generally, not just in the renewable energy sector, that if we were to ramp up manufacturing here, what in your view? I mean, do you have comments on how we would get that to happen? Let me go back to a comment that Naina also made, that MSME and their compliance and the ease of doing business as far as MSMEs are concerned. Is there anything in either in the package or let's say in the administrative works, which would just make it easier for us to build more capacity here, meaning manufacturing capacity, and inject a little bit more productivity out of MSMEs, and I guess reduce their compliance complications?
Let me thank in the beginning the ILO as also UNIDO and UNFP for inviting me and giving me this opportunity. I fully agree with what Naina Lal and Mr. Manish has indicated about the improving the manufacturing activity, which is a necessity. And I think Government of India has given enough incentives in the stimulus packages also to ensure that your manufacturing sector goes up, because currently we have a very small manufacturing sector when it comes to the GDP, as also its contribution to the employment as well. One reason could be because we have a very dichotomous labor market where you have a huge informal economy, and these informal economies do not provide much of a social security. Now, if we really want, so the two important things that we need to make available for manufacturing sector to really come up is to make available what Naina was also talking about, the finance facility to these micro, because we are a nation where out of total 700 lakh units, we have 70 million units in this country, enterprise in this country, of which close to about 98.5% are such which are employing less than 10. So you can imagine that the companies which are employing very small number of people, what kind of a financial ability that they have, financial ability not only to invest in research, innovation, new technology, cope up with the competitiveness and improve their productivity, but also to ensure that they are able to skill, reskill and upskill their manpower, because they just can't map the skilling, reskilling requirement of their people. So the very first important thing that I think has been done in the stimulus package also is to make available huge resources to the micro, small and medium enterprises, and redefining the micro, small and medium enterprises so that the scope of the units can be improved and can be enhanced and enlarged, and more companies can come in. Another important issue which I am talking from my own ministry's perspective, to improve the manufacturing sector, we need to follow the cluster-based approach, what Manish was also referring to, and Nana Lakina also mentioned about, because given the fact that these companies have a very small size, it is just not possible for them to invest in the kind of infrastructure that is required to connect them to the market, which involves having a good connectivity, road, and also having a new designs, innovation. So if you are able to develop the cluster, identify the cluster, and then handhold these clusters in terms of making government investing in research, in design innovations, then these companies and our, I think, manufacturing can always go up. Second important thing is that we have the ease of doing business. And as far as these micro, small, and medium enterprises are concerned, we do have the URR. I think what somehow there is lack of awareness generation and people are not aware. So we literally need to handhold them, to indicate to them that yes, they can come and register themselves. And thirdly, I think we also need to then, coming to my own ministry's perspective, that if we are able to promote somehow the apprenticeship in these units, because the moment we include the apprenticeship, we actually make available ready-made manpower to these industries, because the apprenticeship offers an opportunity to these youngsters or to the workforce to actually get to know what is the practices that are there in the industry. Because minus that experience, if they're coming from the training institutions, they may not be having a very good industry institute connect. Since they do not have industry institute connect, it becomes very, very difficult for them to understand what the industry wants. And in this scenario, in this age, when we are experiencing Industry 4.0, when there is a liberalization, and there is a movement of many industries from China to India, and we have to invite the FDI in this sector, I think it's very, very necessary that we are able to make available the skilled manpower to the people. And what Calvin was talking about, that there has to be a just transition, I think this strategy will definitely ensure that nobody is lost. Now, coming to a factor that when you talk about the manufacturing also, I don't know whether this will be covered in bill, that we have seen that as soon as the lockdown was announced, huge number of people, they started returning back. Now, who were they? They were the people, perhaps they were engaged in the small manufacturing, unauthorized, illegal, unregistered units, which were largely in the cities. Now, when they found one Friday that there's a lockdown, their jobs were gone, so they had no other, they were forced to return back to their native places. Now, since they were forced to return back to the native places, the government of India actively entered into it, and they wanted to ensure that there is a livelihood continuity. So I fully also agree with what just Calvin has suggested, that there has to be just transition, where there is, while there's a loss of jobs, but at the same time, we are able to create more and more jobs. Now, coming to these reverse migrants, the program that the government of India has announced in terms of Pradhan Mantri Garib Kalyan Rozgar Yojana, I think many of the sectors that have been identified and the job and the works that have been identified, they very well fit into the green jobs category as well. And I personally feel that green job concept is not very new to India, because if you look at our old artisans, they had been working with natural fibers. Our Kumahas have been working with muds, and they have been creating an environment where there were green jobs. And Government of India, I think, has a very robust green job, or I'll say climate impact mitigation strategy, wherein we have been focusing on not only on afforestation, we are focusing on new and renewable sources of energy. We are also focusing on agricultural practices. We are also focusing on plantation, minor produce. And I think these are the things which will not only ensure that we are able to follow the framework that ILO has given in terms of the just transition on the one hand, we are also able to develop the rural enterprises, which may not fall into the typical definition of a manufacturing sector, the way we treat it. But yes, they are enterprises which are providing opportunities to the people who have returned back. And Another important thing, I think, the focus on your drinking water, sanitation, your waste management. These are the activities which will create not only the livelihood continuity, but also perhaps new units, new manufacturing activities. Because if you look into the examples what Seva has presented, they are the usage of the waste product. They are able to make available many of the things using the women power. So today we have not only facing a situation where there's a loss of job for the men folk, but there's also a loss of job for the women. And this gives us an opportunity to improve our female labor force participation also. Thank you.
Thank you, Sunita. I mean, I must go back and thank the panelists again because you're making my job really easy as a moderator. You're raising questions for the next panelist straight away. Sunita, you've touched on something that Dr. Khosla had in his presentation right up in the beginning as a keynote. You know that we have to do we need to change the way the economic growth model to have a little bit more of a just economy, if I can call it that. Issues around daily workers and job creation. I think the focus here is really about what do we do about the job losses and what do we do about the job creation thereafter, and then of course how do we get them skilled? How do we get this reverse migration? I mean, I don't like to call it migration because they're all in one country, but the people that have gone back to their homes and villages, how would we get them skilled up? So let me actually use the same set of questions and let me get to Mr. Babu and Mr. Suri Babu. Let me ask Mr. Babu at NABARD, because a number of these issues are also, I understand, of course, NABARD is not dealing directly with the villages, but these issues are out there in all of our agricultural sectors in particular, and they affect villages, they affect rural employment, rural demand, employment generation, employment creation. So, Mr. Babu, let me ask you, how do you see this? Because we have Sunita saying the government has changed the certain definitions. There's money the resources being made available. The creation of this cluster approach. Does that have a bearing in your work right now?
Yes, thank you very much for inviting us to be a panel member in this esteemed program. Let me tell you that yes, NABARD is very much involved in the rural development process, and the COVID situation has led to a paradoxical situation as far as labor is concerned. One, states which are agriculturally intensive, who used to depend on migrant labor for the agriculture operations, like Punjab, Haryana, and several other states in the south, even like Andhra Pradesh, Kerala. See, this pandemic has resulted in severe labor shortage. On the other hand, the reverse migration, or what I can say as homecoming of the native families to their respective regions or respective states, especially in the eastern and eastern states. I mean, this has led to a situation where we have surplus manpower available for whom we have to look for a profitable, sustainable employment opportunities. Of course, in the areas where there is a shortage of labor for agriculture operation purpose, perhaps the only solution that lies is to look at mechanization as an intervention for meeting agriculture operations, because agriculture operations will not stop because they are season bound, they have to be taken up, and you have to look at alternatives maybe by way of mechanization. But the real challenge is creating opportunities for the people who have come back to their homes. And this is one area where for quite some time since the pandemic has occurred, we have been looking at, even in NABARD, we have been looking at how best we can use these youth and attract them towards that agriculture sector, which was their primary occupation before they left on migration. I mean, this is one area which we are working with, and we are even trying to identify some potential enterprises in agriculture and allied sectors, and also including the and certain non-farm sector-based activities in the rural areas, including the micro food enterprises or the localized processing activities, these we want to identify, and it's not just, we don't want to end it with identifying and telling them that, okay, these are all the activities which you can take it up. And we want to even go to the next level of providing necessary capacity building and training to these identified entrepreneurs, identify them and cluster them into the activities of similar nature, be it agriculture related or animal husbandry related or dairy, poultry sector, whatever it is, cluster them into groups and then train them with necessary technical inputs and provide hand-holding support till they establish in that particular activity. And also facilitate credit linkages. I mean, NABARD is a facilitator for credit as well. Through banking channels, facilitate credit linkages. That is one area which we are actively working on. In fact, even we are having dialogue with the premier institutions and apex level research institute like ICAR in identifying potential region-specific activities where these people can be effectively engaged with training and hand-holding support. That is one aspect that we can look at, I mean, we are looking at for providing employment. The second aspect is that convergence with government programs, especially this Mahatma Gandhi NREGS. See, NABARD as a developmental institution, we have been implementing several developmental projects, either through watershed development or providing sustainable livelihood. We have more than 3,000 projects being implemented there, and most of them are being implemented with NGOs as facilitators. We select NGOs because they are very good in social engineering and they understand the needs of the people. They are doing it. And in these projects, we could ensure an effective convergence with the programs like MGNREGS, wherein the resources, especially the monetary resources available, were effectively pooled and we could create sustainable assets there, especially in the soil and water conservation works. I mean, these are the works which can have the added benefit of building in the climate resilience in those areas. That way, a proper convergence and then reorienting the works under MGNREGS towards these sustainable development interventions will also lead to developing some sort of a sustainable green pathways even in agriculture sector, which otherwise is a green pathway. But it can ensure some sort of a climate resilience. Perhaps that is one of the adaptation interventions to ensure that to address the climate change challenges which we are facing. I mean, these two are the areas primarily we should look at. Plus, some of the enterprises, micro enterprises at rural level, which again NABARD is actively working with, especially through women's groups, through SHGs, and farmer interest groups. We are promoting this type of interventions. Maybe we have to reorient and then maybe look at specific location-specific needs and come out with different products and programs to implement these.
Mawa, again, I want to come back to you. I have follow-up questions, but let me just go through the panel with additional. Let me go through the panel. Let me ask Rita. There is, Rita, I've been hearing two types of responses as far as biodiversity and even the word climate change is concerned, but most certainly biodiversity in light of COVID and the package and so on. There's one response is a little bit pessimistic that our discourse around biodiversity has now taken a bit of a backseat. It wasn't considered so urgent, and so it's silent. And then there's other discussion that says, oh, but our skies are so much cleaner. The birds have come back to our balconies, and we really need to do something. As this whole panel has been saying, we really need to do something about managing our resources better and just building and living in a better planet. What are your thoughts on, given that you are working so closely on biodiversity finance, on climate change, on green economy? What are your thoughts on where this package is coming out, or where we are all coming out post-COVID?
Thank you, Mawa, for your questions, and thank you, organizers, for having me here. Well, so much has been spoken about, but let me pick up the basic question that we are, or the two questions that we are looking at. How green is the package, stimulus package, and what are the opportunities? for, entry of green considerations? Well, we all know that there have been some studies, there have been some estimates on measurement, how green the packages are across countries. And there is also cross-country comparison, etc. But in terms of what are the opportunities that are available and what are the entry points? So we all know, and it's been said in the special remarks and opening remarks, that it's loaded towards relief measures, and rightly so, because we needed to invest in health infrastructure, etc. Then we also needed to provide relief to migrant workers, to people who are below the poverty line, who have lost their jobs, etc. Now, coming to economic revival component of the package. If I could take you back to Prime Minister's speech, where he's talking about these two principles, which is also a longer term perspective. So we see a change in, or some indications of change towards a different development path, which Ashok talked about, which earlier speakers have talked about. Although we will take some more time really unpacking what are these Atmanirbhar Bharat or self-reliant India and local for local. But to my understanding, this is talking about just economy. This is talking about employment generation, inclusiveness, encouraging local entrepreneurship, empowering local economies, use of local resources, etc. Now, coming to the details of the package, which sectors it puts spotlight on? It puts a spotlight on agriculture, actually primary sector, because it is also talking about coal, and then MSMEs, including the rural enterprises and micro enterprises. In agriculture, now what are the opportunities? You asked me a question on biodiversity. For biodiversity, we have an act, we have so many provisions. What is the biggest concern is the institutions which can champion the cause of biodiversity in our planning process, in our budgeting process, and also look for these opportunities in various government programs, whether these are central government program or state government program, and especially at the district level, there's no one to talk about biodiversity or climate change, where actually most of the money is spent. So that's the worry. I'll give you some examples. Like if we want to promote local varieties, that means we want to promote biodiversity. We need to support seed bank. We need to support labeling and GI certification. So that's kind of pricing the nature. Then we also need to protect and encourage farmers' right on their IPRs. A lot of farmers are doing very good work in spite of the fact that there isn't the kind of encouragement that should be there. They're working on conservation, they're working on seed varieties, etc. So, to my mind, whatever we have, and we had even before COVID, now the execution is the key. For that, we need strong institutions. We need capacity building of the institutions, training and capacity of the farmers and others in that ecosystem, even the smaller enterprises, etc. NABARD has a role to play, other NFBCs, NBFCs have a role to play, but whether they will rise to the occasion now after COVID, or everybody will be in a rush to kind of, to show results like, well, it's kind of, looking up. So that is something where not only the central government, but also the state governments and district level functionaries also have a crucial role to play. Similarly, for MSMEs, there are great opportunities: energy, supply chain, waste management, not only their own waste management, but the waste which is generated in rural areas, and we know crop stubble, burning, etc. So here also, our MSMEs are under tremendous pressure. MSMEs already face huge challenges in India. But now on top of that, if we want to introduce green concept or green technology, etc., I don't think there are projects which are ready in the pipeline. These projects will have to be generated. Who helps? BFCs help. It's basically we need a vibrant ecosystem around MSMEs. So probably we need to first create that and look for opportunities there. What kind of training, what kind of skills are required, what kind of funding is required, technology is required, forums are required where different stakeholders can meet, they can connect, they can talk to each other and find a connect between them. Yes, talking about public finance, well, we wanted to see more on tax reform, expenditure reform, so that the prices of natural capital could be kind of discovered, but that hasn't happened. We wanted to hear more on sustainable consumption. If there is a demand for natural or products which are based on nature, then only there will be a drive for supply for those kind of products. So that hasn't happened. But here I would say that there are some interesting examples, like in Punjab, they attempted to do green budgeting. They did not walk the till the end, but then there was some capacity building. There you could see that there was acceptance and there was intent. Now I'm working on a study where I'm helping the government of Bihar. So, which is again a good initiative, because if governments know where their expenditures are going and what impact they are making on environment, I think that is the first necessary step to start the entire process. And I would also like to say that someday I hope to see when a fiscal policy is announced, generally what you see, how this is going to help the poor, how this is going to help create jobs, how this is going to help this sector or that sector. No government talks about what would be the impact of this policy on environment. Can we demand that from government? That would also be a very big step. Back to you.
Thank you, Rita. Thank you again. Once again, leads in very nicely to a question I'd had for Malini. How much green money is there? And given your experience, can we tag this green money? One of the questions even coming into from the audience. In fact, there were two people that raised it. Where are we on, or can we have something like green budget statements? Naina also mentioned a little bit of that earlier in her comments, that foreign investors or any kind of investors coming in are beginning to put a little bit of pressure as well on asking that investees do more on the green side and higher performance on the ESG side. So there's a push and pull happening. So can I just ask Malini, where are we? How green is this? How much green money is there? And how do you feel about green or climate tagging, if I can call it that, green budgeting? What are your views on how realistic is that, or is it just is that just too far down the road right now? We can't think about that. We've just got other bigger issues to deal with.
Thank you so much, Anupa. I hope I'm audible.
Yes, you are.
And first, I'd like to begin by saying thank you so much for giving this opportunity to me to present at this discussion. Now, on the question of, how much money is there, first I'd like to see how much money is there depends on how much the government wants to spend. So if you look at the package that has been given by the government, unfortunately what we see that the package focuses mainly on monetary policy measures. And it is less so on fiscal policy measures, which is where the government spending is. Now, we also know that, in crisis like this, which also has a measure of demand compression, monetary policy measures are less effective than fiscal policy measures. So I would say the first course correction that we need to do is, and I think I agree with Dr. Khosla to a large extent, that, we have this neoliberal dogma of fiscal consolidation. So the first course correction that is required is more fiscal spending. Now, this is not something that we as CBGA are saying. We have even had, former governors saying that this is the time to increase spending and increase it hugely. Now, obviously, we all know that this crisis has from a felt health crisis, it has transformed into a huge humanitarian crisis with the poor and the vulnerable facing huge job losses, destitution, and hunger. For the revival package, therefore, has to have at least 3 elements. It has to be inclusive, it has to be sustainable, and it has to be green. Now, going forward to make it green, we all know that the government has initiated a number of measures for making it green. So, if what is needed, as I said, the money is there, depends on whether the government is ready to orient the budget towards it. So there is need for 3 things. Basically, orient the budget towards more green energy. I agree that, moving to a green energy immediately is not possible, but it is necessary to increase spending. And I'm saying it on the basis of the last budget that was presented in February this year. We actually see a very little increase in renewable energy. So it is needed to increase spending in this area. Also that, within the given budget, there is a need to reorient the budget to make it more sensitive to those who are marginalized. So if I take simply take the example of rural electrification. Now, unfortunately in India, because of the huge financing requirement for renewable energy, we have to depend on various sources of funding. But if we look at rural electrification, we cannot be depending on anybody other than the government, simply because the scalability in rural areas and also the lack of skills needed for green technology is so huge that the government needs to put in the money there. That would also mean a greater uptake of green technology and also provide green jobs. In terms of, budgeting and earmarking or tagging certain climate related or climate resilient budget, we feel that it's a very good entry point, like you have had in gender budgeting statement. But we also need to be very cautious, because our experience from gender budgeting statement shows that, sometimes there's a problem of it becoming a mere accounting exercise. So you really don't see much increase in expenditure on these areas. What you just see is some bit of accounting. To avoid that, therefore, it is necessary to increase spending again and also have monitoring means to see whether they're actually making an impact. I'll stop here. There are other things I would like to speak about, which is basically Kusum, but which I can take up later on when the questions come. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Manvi. Unfortunately for the panel, we are now dot at 6 o'clock, but if you will allow me 5 more minutes, I might just abuse some of the moderator privilege. And if I can ask and take the liberty of asking you, just do one round. If I were to ask you, we're just going to do 1 minute each. If there were just one thing you were to pull, not from the package or specifically, but if there were one thing you were to pull from the package and the post-COVID general sentiment and economic situation, what would that be? and translate that back to where you sit. Meaning, what is the one thing you would do differently, or what is the one big priority that we have to deal with right now? What would it be? And I don't want to pick people because I'm kind of just throwing this back at you. I realize it's 6 o'clock, and unfortunately, this panel started very, very late.
Mahua, if I could come in.
Sure, Naina.
I think I would give a very high focus to the microfinance sector, which today is hurting really badly in terms of, all the issues as we know them right now. So by supporting the MFI sector, which is largely, as you know, driven by self-help groups, and helping in terms of some of the reskilling and livelihoods around agriculture and sustainable agriculture and skilling and some of the excellent thoughts that many of the panelists have had, we could tie in both helping the immediate issue of where they sit, which is to provide some reprieve in terms of repayment, but also help them addressing repayments in the future through providing greener skill sets. And it could be anywhere from, planting forests or some of the livelihood ideas that we have heard of already. Water would be another one, given that government is already committed to taking drinking water to every home. So skill the people in building some of that.
I think what Nana has rightly pointed out that we need to skill also, and I think the government focuses on skilling, reskilling, and upskilling. We have started mapping the skill requirement, at least to begin with, of those people who have gone back, so they can have actually livelihood continuity. In these 116 districts that have been identified by the government under the Pradhan Mantri Kalyan Yojana, we have already identified the skill sets so that they can be linked with the local employment opportunities. Because today it is the local economy which needs to be supported, and it's the district administration is fully on board. And after identifying that, our own ecosystem is ready to reskill them so that they can access the employment opportunities in the local area. If not wage employment, perhaps they can set up some kind of a small enterprise which will provide them a livelihood continuity so that both socially as also economically they are on a footing. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Yes, Manish?
Yeah, one area where government can immediately act and which will lead to a paradigm shift is just clearing their receivables with corporate India and the MSME sector.
Okay.
There's about 5 lakh crores of receivable which governments have to pay to MSME and the corporate India. If that is cleared, that will lead to a huge stimulus. And the other thing is enforceability of contracts.
Sorry.
Other is the enforceability of contracts. In renewable sector, we are seeing Andhra Pradesh, where whatever was agreed to as part of the contract, that the government is not paying. They had agreed for certain tariffs, and they are not willing to pay that. So I think these kind of clear issues of lack of enforceability of contract is hurting India a lot. And this does not require any stimulus. This just requires just meeting your commitments. I think this will lead to a very big change. Yeah.
Sure, thank you. Malini?
Coming in where Mr. Chaurasia left it, yeah, absolutely. This is not a stimulus. This is what the government should have provided in any case.
Yeah.
What I would like to see in any case is a larger stimulus. And I think, I'm not sure, but the fact that the government has recently extended free food for the population up to the end of November gives one hope that the government will think a little more seriously. Because, as I said, without fiscal policy, revival cannot happen, and it cannot be equitable or green. Second is also that, we have the measures to finance it in the longer term. We can actually bring in lots of taxation measures, which this is the right opportunity to bring. Thank you.
Thank you, Malini. Mr. Babu? I'm just trying to see if he's still here.
Yeah, I'm very much here.
Okay, Mr. Babu. Yes, so over to you. What would you do differently?
In fact, if you look at the stimulus or the financial package that is provided for the agriculture sector, focus on infrastructure. Especially there are a lot of infrastructure gaps in the food value chain, agriculture value chain. Agriculture, I include in the allied sector. And this is one area which needs more attention. Perhaps this is one important takeaway from this financial package. And this is a package which can be very well clubbed with institutional finance as well, that is bank credit as well, wherein have some sort of a holistic development approach, and the future development also with the credit and as a blended product with credit and this government subsidy incentives. No, it needs to be based on a value chain financing approach even for agriculture sector. This is something which we consider it as an important takeaway from this stimulus, and which we'll be pursuing from NABARD side, which we'll be pursuing through the banks for financing for agriculture and allied sector.
Okay, thank you. Thank you for that. Rita, are you still there? No, I think we have lost Rita. I'm here.
I'll just.
So Rita, to you, what is the one thing you would pick up?
I would say a lot has been said about availability of funding, etc. I would say government has to strengthen its governance so that whatever is planned can be executed well. And for a longer term perspective, include or mainstream green planning process and budgeting process. The previous speaker said that, well, what use it is if the allocations are not increased. But then you can ask questions, you can hold government accountable. That's the benefit if you monitor and measure how much is going for green considerations.
Okay, thank you for that. Thank you. I'm now very aware. Thank you also for entertaining and indulging this moderator abuse from your moderator. I will have to stop. Unfortunately, we just have so many questions, and this is the kind of topic, and these are the kind of issues that will really have, we really should have had more time. And I know that we will get back into these questions, and they're very, very pertinent. And I really sincerely hope that these questions are not lost, because of course, no package is ever, none of this change is going to happen immediately. In fact, some of the issues that you have all raised are just going to take a lot of, they're going to go through the administrative system. It's going to have to trickle down to the municipalities. There are some serious structural issues that have come up here that you have raised. So I do hope that I will see you all in different, either in this kind of channels, but in different forums, keeping this kind of discussion alive and raising these kind of issues wherever appropriate and whenever appropriate, because I think we all have this collective responsibility to see, to the best of our abilities, to what extent can we push wherever possible. So I will just use this time. Thank you very much for being with us on this panel. Thank you very much for your attention and for your indulging me 10 to 8 minutes past the hour. I will hand the floor back to Anuba, or perhaps it would be Zinat. I'll hand the floor back to Page and Development Alternatives. They have the logistics. So thank you very much once again, and I hope to see you all again in some other forum.
Thank you, Mawar. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you.